In December 1877, along the desolate borderlands of Colorado, the wind howled without mercy, and snow drifted in tight spirals across the sky. It dusted rooftops, wagon wheels, and window panes dimly lit by flickering lamplight. The town lay breathless under a bone-deep cold, and Thatcher Rowe trudged through Main Street with frozen slush on his boots and a wool blanket clutched to his chest. Inside it, his newborn whimpered, red-faced and hungry. The infant had refused goat's milk, cow's milk. Nothing soothed him for 3 days. Only one thing ever had, and that was now impossible. His mother, Mary, lay in the frozen earth behind the ranch house. Thatcher hadn't slept since the night she bled out and the midwife whispered she was gone. In that dreadful silence, he'd buried his wife with his own trembling hands and now carried their unnamed baby through the icy town, knocking door to door. "Please," he rasped to anyone who answered, his voice heavy with grief and wind. "He won't eat. Do you know anyone nursing?" Some women turned him away. Some men shut doors in his face. One old woman offered thin broth. Another muttered a prayer. But most just stared, blank, silent, unwilling to offer what the world no longer gave freely. Thatcher repeated the words like a chant, softer each time. "He needs breast milk. Just a little. Please." Laughter and mockery echoed behind doorframes. "No woman's gonna hand that over," someone scoffed. "What's next? A womb?" Someone else sneered. By midnight, Thatcher's steps slowed. The baby's cries had grown hoarse, less desperate, more hollow, and that terrified him more than the noise. He collapsed on the church steps, curling around the infant, shielding him from the wind as best he could. The baby's skin had grown pale and blotchy. His lips cracked. A crumpled flyer slipped from Thatcher's coat and skittered down the street like a dying prayer. He didn't chase it. He just held his son tighter. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I told your mama I'd protect you, but I don't know how." The baby hiccuped and whimpered. Thatcher rocked gently, pleading with the night to let the child live. He never noticed the figure standing across the street, cloaked in shadow, holding a letter in gloved hands. The wind carried more than snow that night. At the far edge of town, where sagging fences bent and the woods pressed in close, a flyer snagged itself against an old house's porch. That flyer was discovered before dawn by Maris Delaney. Wrapped in a shawl, milk jars in hand, she stepped out into the freezing air and spotted it. The name at the bottom stopped her heart. Thatcher Rowe. The flyer read simply, "Need breast milk for newborn baby. Please save my baby." She read the words 3 times. Her hands shook. Inside her, the milk still flowed. 2 months since she lost her own child to silent death in the cradle. SIDS, they called it, as if that word could explain the gaping hole in her chest. Her baby had died while she dreamed beside him. Her husband had left soon after, blaming her, accusing her. He walked out the door and never came back. Alone, Maris had kept pumping each morning, unable to throw the milk away, storing it in neat rows of glass jars. Something about it kept her anchored to the world. She returned inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the flyer. Then, trembling, she began to write, "Mr. Rowe, I saw your flyer. Came to me on the wind. I don't know if this is chance or something greater, but I can't ignore it. I still have milk. I pump daily, not for attention or money, just because I can't stop. I lost my son 2 months ago. He died in his sleep. The doctors say syndrome. I say silence. I have no one now. My husband left. My family is far. But when I saw your name, I couldn't sit still. I'm not crazy. I want nothing from you, only the chance to hold a child again. Even once. If you still need milk, if you still need help, please come. I will feed him or give you what I have. No one has to know. This is the last part of me that still knows how to give." She sealed the letter, addressed it to Thatcher Rowe, General Delivery, Larkspur Post, then walked through the snow to the mailbox at the edge of town. Her breath curled in front of her. Her steps were the only marks on the untouched snow. As she slid the envelope into the slot, something inside her shifted. Something long sealed, now beginning to open. Later, She sat on her bed and whispered into the quiet, "If they come, I will be ready." The snow fell harder through the day, blanketing the town in stillness. By midnight, Thatcher stood once more at a porch, not to beg, but to hope. The house was older than most, tucked behind frost-glazed trees. He held Elias beneath his coat, the baby's body fragile and weak. Thatcher's hand hovered at the door. Every instinct in him screamed that this might be foolish, dangerous, desperate. But Elias whimpered, lips too dry for another refusal. There were no hours left to wait. He knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Maris stood there, pale in lamplight, golden hair loose over her shoulders. Her shawl hugged her tightly. Her eyes fell on the bundle in his arms, and she exhaled, not surprised, but as if finally exhaling after holding her breath too long. "I saw the light," she said softly. "Come in before he catches the wind." Thatcher stepped into the warmth. The air smelled of chamomile and smoke. She had laid a blanket near the fire, a kettle steaming beside a bottle warmer. Everything was ready, as if she had always known they would come. He knelt, unwrapped Elias. The child's face was red and swollen, lips cracked, too exhausted to cry. Maris knelt beside him. "May I?" she asked. Thatcher nodded, unable to speak. She cradled Elias with the ease of someone who had never forgotten how. Her fingers moved on instinct, murmuring gentle nothings. Then she sank into a rocker, unbuttoned her blouse, and offered him to her breast. The baby latched instantly, no protest, no coaxing. Just the pure, quiet rhythm of a starving child drinking deep. And the room fell still. Not the silence of death or sorrow, but something sacred. A hush that seemed to hush the world itself. Maris closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks, cradling the child who drank like he had known her all along. Her fingers stroked the soft hair behind his ear. Thatcher stood motionless, breath caught in awe and grief. A single tear slid down his cheek. He lifted a hand to wipe it, but stopped when Maris looked up and said quietly, "His name." Thatcher cleared his throat. She looked from the baby back to him and whispered, "He looks like her." He nodded. She was softer, kinder. He got all of that. They sat in silence, warmed by fire and the slow breath of a baby full for the first time in days. Elias nursed until he drifted into sleep, his small body limp and content, arm dangling across Maris's chest. She didn't move, just held him there, head bowed, eyes closed, like a prayer finally answered. Thatcher finally dropped to his knees beside her, his voice barely above a whisper, ragged, trembling. "I didn't think I'd ever hear quiet like this again." Maris gave the faintest nod. "Neither did I." Outside, the wind wandered gently over the plains. Inside, near the fire, a young father and a woman hollowed by sorrow sat in stillness. No words passed between them, no contact, just the shared weight of a child who, without knowing, stitched two broken hearts into a single thread of warmth and silence. By the end of the second week, something shifted within the house's rhythm. The wails that once cut through the air softened into murmured sighs. The bitter scent of ash and long-dead moments gave way to rising bread, warming milk, and a hint of time left drying in the window's sunlight. Aaliyah began sleeping for longer stretches. She nursed peacefully, her tiny fingers often curling against Maris's collarbone as she held her close by the flickering firelight. Maris had begun waking early, long before the sun's gold crept over the horizon. Wrapped in thick wool, she waited by the stove with the kettle already humming. Thatcher always arrived just after the frost began lifting off the stone path, boots crunching softly. He didn't knock anymore. The gate creaked open, the porch boards moaned beneath his steps, and then he stood in the doorway, Elias snug against his chest in a sling. Every morning he looked weary, but no longer frantic. And when Maris reached for Elias, the tension in Thatcher's shoulders always melted. Giving her the child was no longer about relief. It was trust. She never asked him to stay, yet he always did. Fixing little things. A roof shingle here, a crooked hinge there, The old kitchen door that had locked itself shut since the fall. Sometimes Maris would find him outside, crouched in the wind, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled up, hair clinging damp to his forehead. When she asked him why, he only shrugged. He sleeps better in a warm house. She began doing small things, too. She baked soft biscuits with golden oat crusts, dense loaves of rye dusted with flour like fresh snow. She simmered orange peels with cloves, letting the fragrant steam wind through the rafters. Her voice would drift lightly as she sang, just enough for the melody to find its way into the corners of the home. One frosty morning, sunlight filtered through streaked glass. Maris noticed something new. A packet of jasmine green tea rested on the windowsill, nestled beside the sugar jar. Her favorite, rare and hard to come by in these parts. She blinked. Outside, Thatcher tightened the fence latch, saying nothing. He hadn't mentioned it. She made no remark. But that morning, she brewed the tea slowly, gently. 2 cups. When he stepped through the door and handed Elias to her, she passed him a cup without speaking. He paused, unsure, then took it. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. They sat each in their own chair by the hearth. Elias fed quietly, then dozed, head resting against Maris's chest. The only sound was the creak of the rocker and spoons clicking gently against porcelain. They never spoke about what was growing between them. There were no grand words, no explanations. Just mornings shared, space held, silence honored. Something new was forming. Not yet family, not strangers, but something tender, something slowly becoming, breathing with the peaceful rhythm of a child finally at rest. The thaw came slowly to Merryweather. Snow shrank into narrow streaks. The river exhaled its first breath in months. But as the land softened, the townspeople's hearts did not. It began with murmurs at the general store, glances from behind lace-trimmed curtains. By the 3rd week of Thatcher's daily visits to Maris's cottage, the town had a story, and like all small-town tales, it grew fangs. "They say he's living with her now," Mrs. Beach whispered while weighing flour into brown paper. "The widow, still nursing, mourning, feeding someone else's baby like it's her own." "That's not right," someone muttered behind the dried beans. "He's letting a broken woman raise his son. Probably sleeps there too." By month's end, rumor turned to dogma. "They're not even married," someone scoffed at the tavern. "She's not the boy's kin. Just some ghost nurse replacing the dead with another dead." Then the first letter arrived. Folded tight in a stained envelope, no return address. Thatcher found it tucked into his horse's saddle. "You disgrace your wife's memory. That boy deserves better than hand-me-down grief. Leave before we make you." The second came days later, pinned with a rusted nail to Maris's gate. "Stop pretending he's yours. You can't replace the dead." She burned them both, saying nothing. But Thatcher, he didn't burn. He boiled, spoke less, worked more, fixed everything as if the very motion of mending could keep the anger at bay. Nails pounded harder, buckets scrubbed raw. He was never still, like stopping meant breaking. Maris saw the changes, the hunched shoulders, clenched jaw whenever a rider lingered too long outside. One afternoon, she stepped onto the porch and found him loading the wagon. Blankets, Elias's cradle, his saddlebag, all packed tight. She walked down the steps. "What are you doing?" He didn't meet her eyes. "We're leaving. Tonight." Her breath caught. "Why?" "They won't stop," he said through gritted teeth. "I won't let Elias grow up in a place that punishes kindness." She stepped closer. Her chest ached. "And me?" He paused. "I can't ask you to live like this." Under their eyes. "You've lost enough." Her voice trembled. "If you go, I lose everything." Again. He stilled. She reached for him, not with desperation, but with certainty. Her fingers curled gently around his wrist. "If you go," she whispered, "I lose him, and I lose you. That's losing twice." He turned. Their eyes locked. 2 people carved by loss, standing in the muddy yard of a house that had seen both death and rebirth. "I don't need them to understand me," Maris said softly, "but I need you to believe I belong here." He looked at her for a long, long time, and then, finally, he did. With a trembling breath, he let the rope fall and pulled her close. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but something deeper. He held her the way someone clings to their only light in a storm. Steady, thankful, fearless. Her head rested gently against his chest, and between them, Ilya shifted with a sleepy sigh. Beyond their fence, the world faded away. Let them talk, let them write and judge. None of it mattered here. In this stillness between heartbeats, a man who'd once broken beneath grief and a woman who'd learned to live in silence found something quiet, unspoken, but real. They wouldn't run anymore. They would stay. They would root. Summer arrived in Merryweather like a sigh. The river warmed, frogs sang under weeping willows, and Elias, almost 1 year old, took his first wobbly steps across the wooden porch of Maris's cottage. The boards creaked beneath him, but he laughed with every clumsy move, arms flailing like a bird testing new wings. Thatcher sat on the steps, one knee up, a grin slowly spreading across his face. He had never known a sound as beautiful as that laughter, pure, untouched by the sorrow that had once filled their lives. Inside, Maris hummed as she folded warm laundry. The air smelled of lavender and fresh bread. The house felt alive now. Not a museum of pain, but a breathing space of rhythms. Feedings, small chores, quiet conversations, and the soft thump of Elias crawling from room to room. That afternoon, with sunlight pouring golden through the windows, Thatcher had gone into town for supplies. Worn out from chasing butterflies in the garden, Elias lay curled in Maris's arms. She rocked in the old chair by the fire, her hand slowly rubbing his back. "Hush now," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Mama's here." He whimpered once, then let out a tiny sigh against her collarbone. She leaned her cheek against his hair. "Sleep, little one. Sleep, Silas." The name came before she noticed. Her whole body tensed. Silence. Elias shifted slightly but didn't wake. Maris stared into the fire, arms tightening, breath catching. Then, like a dam finally giving way, she broke. Not the silent tears she'd hidden in the early months. This was something older, deeper, primal. Her sobs shook her, grief welling up like a flood too long held back. She rocked him harder, tears falling into his hair. "I'm sorry," she choked. "I'm sorry, baby. You're not him. I know you're not him." But she couldn't stop. Grief had its own clock. Her shoulders trembled under the weight of a name, the memory of a child who'd vanished in the night, pressed against her chest like a stone. She didn't hear the door open, didn't notice the boots across the floor. Only when a warm coat settled across her shoulders did she lift her eyes. Thatcher knelt beside her, his gaze calm and kind. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes not quite meeting his. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking. I hear it in my head. His name. Always." "I know," he said softly. She swallowed hard. "He died here, you know, in this chair. One moment warm, the next gone. I don't even remember falling asleep, just waking up to silence." Thatcher laid a hand gently on her knee. She looked down at Elias, now breathing peacefully, his little fingers still clutched in her blouse. "I shouldn't be the one raising your son," she said. "He deserves better than a woman who forgets who he is." He shook his head. "Maris," he said quietly, "if that name, Silas, makes the weight in your chest a little easier, then let my son hear it. Not as a mistake, as a song." She blinked, startled. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We all carry ghosts. Maybe some aren't meant to be left behind. Maybe they're here to guide us." Elias stirred again, lips parting in a small sigh. Thatcher smiled. "Call him Silas if it helps you breathe, love." She took a breath. "His name is Elias." "I know," Thatcher said. "But maybe one day he'll grow up knowing he was loved by two names. One from the mother who gave him life, and one from the woman who gave him everything else." The fire snapped gently. Outside, wind rustled through the apple trees. Maris looked at the boy nestled against her. His breaths even, his body warm. A boy with two names. A child carried by 3 hearts. Later, as the sun dropped low over the Colorado hills, golden light stretched long across the river. The water danced in ripples, soft against the stones and the bare feet of the little boy toddling between 2 sets of hands. Elias squealed with delight, arms flapping as he stumbled forward, wind tousling his curls, earth warm beneath his toes. Thatcher held one hand. Maris held the other. The boy laughed, free and fearless, and in that sound something sacred stirred. They had come to this place often in recent weeks, drawn by the quiet of the woods and the deeper hush of each other. The river never asked questions. It only moved forward. Maybe that was why it felt so safe. Elias stumbled over a small stone, and Maris bent to catch him. A gust lifted her hair, and she reached to tame it, but her hands were full. Without a word, Thatcher stepped behind her. His fingers moved slowly, almost shyly, as he gathered her hair and twisted it into a knot, fastening it with the leather band from his wrist. She didn't move, not out of discomfort, but from the reverent tenderness of the moment. Across the stream, an old neighbor passed by in his cart. He paused, watching them. Maris and Thatcher, both steadying the same child, his arms outstretched to the sky. And for a moment the man's vision blurred. Because sometimes, love didn't come with fanfare or roses. Sometimes it simply arrived, barefoot and laughing, between riverbank and sky. "I've told them," he said softly, "that you're Elias's mother." Maris's breath caught. "You already are," he added, "in every way that counts. But I still wanted to ask, because it should be your choice too." For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound came from Elias, clapping with glee, unaware of the heavy pause between the adults. Slowly, Maris reached across the table and wrapped her fingers around the toddler's chubby hand. Her other hand trembled as it found Thatcher's. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from pain but from something deeper, warmer. She gave a small, trembling nod. "Yes," she whispered. The tears spilled, landing softly on Elias's tiny hand. He looked from her to Thatcher and giggled, the pure laughter of a child untouched by the grief that once haunted this home. Thatcher gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Sometimes love came softly, like fingers brushing your hair back behind your ear. That night, back at their cottage, they shared a humble meal: cornbread, bean stew, and the last few slices of preserved apple. Elias sat in his worn wooden high chair, cheeks full from a second helping, banging his spoon on the tray and singing off-key to himself. The fire crackled gently nearby. Thatcher cleared his throat. Maris glanced up. Their eyes met. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about names, about words." She waited. "You've given Elias more than I ever knew to hope for," he said, setting down his fork. "When nothing else worked, you fed him. When I couldn't keep standing, you stayed up holding him. You saved him." Maris blinked. The edges of concern were just starting to crease her brow. "I know you lost a son," he said gently, "and I would never, ever ask you to forget him. But thank you for being this boy's mother." In the flicker of lamplight, 3 hands came together. A family forged not through blood but through quiet acts of grace. Not by obligation, but by the steady bravery it takes to love again. Beyond the window the river flowed on, and within the walls of that little home so did they. A year later, the wind that once carried winter's bite now blew warm and kind across the Colorado plains. Spring had softened not just the land, but the hearts that called the old cottage home. The once weary house stood restored. Its shutters were painted sage green. A new wraparound porch hugged its front, just wide enough for a rocking chair and space for Elias to scatter his wooden toys. Lavender and thyme spilled from garden beds like soft laughter down the stone path. Inside, light danced across the floorboards. Maris hummed a lullaby as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. Beside her sat a cooling mug of tea and her journal, where she'd written something each morning since the day she first dared to believe this life could be hers. She dipped her pen again and wrote, "Today, My child nursed in the arms of a woman who didn't give him life, but gave him love. Motherhood isn't bound in blood. It's made in the small choices, in rocking a fevered child through the night, in knowing the freckle behind his ear, in remembering which lullaby calms him fastest. I didn't birth him, but my soul chose him, and he, in turn, chose me. The patter of tiny feet echoed in the hallway, followed by high-pitched giggles. Elias! He burst into the kitchen, mismatched socks on his feet, dragging a stuffed rabbit behind him. His curls bounced with every step, cheeks glowing from early morning mischief. Thatcher followed, holding a toy cart in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. Someone tried to ride the laundry basket again, he said with a mock-stern tone, eyes twinkling. Maris laughed. He thinks everything with wheels is a horse. Giddy up, Elias shouted, throwing his arms into the air. Thatcher swept him up, spinning him in the air as Elias squealed in delight, arms wide like wings. Maris leaned against the counter, her heart full in ways she no longer feared. Their mornings had found a rhythm slow, sacred. Elias nursed quietly, curled into Maris's chest, soothed by the heartbeat he knew like a lullaby. Thatcher fixed whatever needed fixing, chased their son around the kitchen before breakfast, and kissed Maris's temple when no one was looking. There were no wedding rings, no official promises. But every night, when Elias fell asleep between them, their fingers found one another under the covers. That was promise enough. Maris no longer questioned whether she deserved this peace. She simply lived it. One breezy afternoon, with the scent of mint and lilac in the air, they stood at their front steps. Maris set up the old camera she'd rescued from the attic. It was timed for 10 seconds. She adjusted the frame, then ran back, scooping Elias into her arms just as the shutter clicked. In the photo, they stood together, Elias mid-laugh, hands clasped tightly in theirs. Maris leaned slightly into Thatcher, her eyes bright. He looked into the lens, a rare, unguarded smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. That picture would be framed in carved oak and placed on the mantel. Visitors came and went that summer. Curious townsfolk, old neighbors. Some still whispered, but most said things like, "You made it through," or, "He's lucky to have you both." No one asked about certificates. No one called Maris that woman raising someone else's child. She was simply Elias's mama, and that was everything. One evening, long after Elias had fallen asleep, his rabbit tucked under one arm and a crust of bread still in his fist, Maris and Thatcher sat on the porch beneath a field of stars. "I used to think love was something you earned," Thatcher said softly. "Like land, like trust, that you had to prove yourself." Maris turned toward him, her face silvered in moonlight. "And now?" she asked. He glanced through the window, where their child lay sleeping. The porch light caught the lines of his face, softened by wonder. "Now I think it's something you give," he said. "Even when it hurts." Maris reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his. "He's why we're still breathing," she murmured. Thatcher nodded. "He didn't just survive, Maris. He saved us." They sat in silence, the kind that speaks without words. Later that night, as Maris tucked Elias in, she kissed his curls and whispered against his forehead. "You weren't raised just on milk, little one. You were raised on love, on loss, on the ache of waiting arms, and on the miracle of filling them again. In a home built not just of stone and timber, but of mercy and memory, 3 souls proved that love doesn't ask for permission. And a little boy named Elias, safe in sleep, held between 2 hearts that had broken and mended. He was the living proof. If the story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that love is chosen, not just inherited, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. Here at Wild West Love Stories, we don't just tell tales of dusty towns and sunset rides. We share stories of healing, of choosing hope, of loving again when all seemed lost. So stick around. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Because out here, we don't just ride into sunsets. We rewrite them. And sometimes the fiercest love begins with a second chance.